Hello everyone, I'm Cam from Faircord, and welcome to the Fire Deckathalon Guide. KI has officially announced that the upcoming Fire Deckathalon will begin on Tuesday, May 11th. This video assumes you know a lot about the event, so if you're newer and haven't watched my general Decathlon guide, be sure to check that video out first. Okay, starting off, let's discuss the best treasure cards to carry. This is the list of non-vendor TC that are better than vendor ones. If the event has already started when you're watching this, there's almost no shot you'll see any of these in the bazaar, so feel free to skip this section. But if it hasn't yet, try your best to grab them. Generally speaking, stock up on what you need depending on what your goal is. If you want to farm stages 1 through 4 or 5, for example, then buy a lot of low pip spells. But if you are trying to beat the professor at the top, you should buy a couple of low pip spells and a bunch of spells ranked 8 and above. On this list, pay attention to the accuracy values. They're kind of all over the place. You will be getting 15% accuracy in the tower, so fizzling can happen more often depending on which cards you're using. Let's break these down. Ice has a lot of good ones, and most of what you need are really easy to get. If you're going to try to get to stage 10, you'll need some Woolly Mammoth and Lord of Winter, so get a few of those. For second floors, Snow Angel is a good AoE. Yes, the initial hit doesn't do much, but since you're not going to be using traps, it will do more damage than Frost Giant over time. The top 3 here, Snowbird, Blue Phoenix, and Frost Demon, are absolutely amazing. They do way more than the vendor TC alternatives, and they're really not difficult to find. Some more good news, Icebird and Arctic Zilla have been marked no PvP, so these days you may actually find a few in the bazaar. The rest in the blue section are pretty rare, but keep an eye out for them. In other decathlons, you may have bought a lot from the yellow section here, but if you have enough Snowbird, Blue Phoenix, and Frost Demon, then there's really no need for any of these. Neckbet is really the only one you may want to grab a couple of, because it's 3 pips, but chances are you won't need it. From the red section, you don't really need any of these. Tundra Lord does less than Snow Angel, Frozen Bats is worse than Icebird, and Cold Iron's damage does so much less than Blue Phoenix that I can't see it being too useful. The possible minions for the Decathlon are Ice Guardian, which you can get from the Zafaria Librarian. These are spells that it can use. There's Ice Brandon from farming Neborix, this is what he uses. And finally the Blurg from Road Warriors pack, and here's its spells. As always, I don't think there's any reason to buy packs for the minions, but if you have free time this month, I'd highly recommend Brandon farming. Now that you have your hits, let's discuss the fire enemies and what you need to watch out for. Starting all the way at stage 1, the enemies start to cast Fire Elf. I'm sure you would expect them to, but this introduces an early problem that the other decathlons did not have. Without flat resist, this does way more damage than a normal 2-pip spell. It also takes off more than one shield over time. Basically, all this means is you need to pack more shields and perhaps use decathlon decks earlier than you usually do. Next, on stage 3, they begin using Steel Charm. There's a few ways to get around this. Number 1, you could use Elemental Blades. When they steal your blade, it won't take the ice one. However, it will give them an additional fire blade, so that's a little risky. Number 2, you could not use blades at all and use traps and Balefrost as your main buffs. Third, you could just pack extra blades. Stealing the ice blade doesn't do much for the enemy, and it's nice to have that 45% buff, although after this update I believe it's going to 35%. I would recommend not using balance blades at all, so if you have that as a Maycast talent on your pet, you may want to use a different one, or remove the jewel. It's the only one that gets rid of your buff and buffs the enemy, so steer away from these on all stages. Moving up to stage 4, they begin to Heckhound. This isn't the biggest deal just yet since they don't gain a ton of pips, but they use this all the way up to 10 and it can be a tough one. Important note here, stage 4 is the only floor where enemies cast Heckhound and Fire Elf, so you don't need to worry about too many damage overtimes past here. The most obvious solution here is, again, just pack tons of fire shields. When you have a dot on you and they have a lot of pips to Sunbird or Phoenix or something, you should try to have a shield up. Sometimes the enemies won't give you a break and it will seem like you have dots on you constantly. That's where triage comes in. Difficult to find in the bazaar, but through trades and various drop locations, you should try to obtain a bunch of these. I would only use them on higher pip heckhounds. Lastly, there's Fortify, but as I always say, the amount of Pierce they have counters the Fortify almost completely. This spell could help for this stage only, but I would always pick more shields over Fortify. Continuing to stage 5, enemies will smoke screen. There's not really much you can do on these, just note that they're coming. I'd use higher accuracy spells like Ice Trap on the turn that you get smoke screened to lessen the chance of fizzling. There's nothing too difficult for a while, but once you get to stage 8, they will stun you with Choke. Unlike the Ice Decathalon, this stun actually costs them 2 pips, which is nice, but it's still a problem. Obviously, you could bring Stun Block. I wouldn't recommend though, because you probably will need the deck space for other things, but you can. The better idea is to just keep yourself protected and healed so a stun won't kill you if it does happen. Next, on stage 9, they can Ifrit. It does a lot of damage, so no matter what, keep a shield up when they have 8 pips or more. The most annoying part, however, is the minus 45 weakness. You could use a will cast to get it off, but honestly the best way is to just carry 2 or 3 cleanses in your deck. They're not going to Ifrit you often, and you're not going to want to hit through it. Lastly, stage 10, they can Backdraft. This isn't a hit, but with lots of pips it can be trouble. They have the potential to put an over 100% trap on you. With additional blades, traps, and other buffs, a normal fire shield won't save you from a big hit. On this stage only, I would recommend adding a few additional shields like Volcanic or even Tower to stack with your fire shield. Being double shielded like this will have you taking minimal damage, if not 0, from even the biggest hits. Now let's move on to pets. The first priority for your pet is getting one that has Frozen Kraken trained, if you don't have one already. Frozen Kraken gives an additional boost on the fire enemies, but it will take up any buffs that you are using. So if you're using this for the tower, I would definitely recommend using Balefrost as your main buff. Also, only Frozen Kraken isn't necessarily going to cut it. While you can beat the top with Frozen Kraken, I've found that will cast Triage to be wildly helpful on the upper stages. I can't tell you how many times I needed to fire shield because of how many pips they had, but also have a large Heckhound dot on me. Being able to triage as a bonus move 3 times per battle is super valuable, and it will save you triage TC. Important to note here that Dot Doctor, the may cast triage, is an option, except that would require you to completely redo a pet, and I don't know how much it casts, but I feel like triage is something you're going to want to count on. Finally, let's discuss deck setups. Your deck will depend on which deck you have, what your pet is, which stages you're doing, what jewels you have, your level, what spells the enemy cast, what cards you have, and on and on. Which is why, rather than showing you 1,000 different deck setups, I'll just walk you through how to use the spreadsheet to make your own decks. For this example, let's switch it up and say you've got Fire Deck 6, and you're trying to beat stage 10. Let's say I've got a will cast triage pet, so I cannot rely on Frozen Kraken for any damage. Okay, let's start with offense. Deck 6 has 8% damage, so we'll be looking at column G for the effective health. It looks like I need to do 3,100 to the first guy. I know I'm going to be using Lord of Winter, so in this bottom row, it looks like this value is enough. I need a Feint, Ice Trap, and Balefrost to kill. Seems easy enough, and Steel Charm won't be a problem. I always minion on the second floor of stage 10, so let's pack 2 Ice Brandons. I don't need them both, but I like to have 2 to have a better chance to find them in my deck. I won't be able to one-shot them with any AoE, so I'm going to be using multiple. Snow Angel does the most. Since any type of blade is risky and traps won't help Snow Angel, I'm going to use Balefrost as my only buff and use 3 of them. That will 100% kill, so if for whatever reason you can't pull your Brandons, you don't need them to do any damage. Alright, for the top, we have Falmea with about 3,800 effective health. Now what we did before won't be enough, and we have 2 options to do more. First, we could add an Elemental Blade, but that's risky, so I would rather put in the Trap, Feint, and Balefrost that we need, then put in a backup Blue Phoenix to finish her off. With the Balefrost up, it'll do more than enough. Okay, now for the rest of this space we use for defense. Even though we have 3 free triages per battle, with our pet, they tend to overtime a lot, so let's throw in a couple extra triage for emergencies. For heals, I like to do a general, 2 fairies, and a satyr. And let's bring in 3 cleanses in case of Ifrits. If they Ifrit you more than 3 times throughout the tower, then the Brandon is your only backup. Use 2 in the middle or 1 on the top floor if you end up needing to. Before we flood the rest with fire shields, let's add a few volcanic shields as well for the times they have a ton of buffs up. And lastly, we'll fill the rest with our fire shields. With that, our deck is ready and we're ready to enter the tower. And that will do it for the Fire Decathlon guide. I hope this was helpful. Make sure to leave a comment below if you have any questions, or join the Discord in the description, and I'm available there to help all the time. Check out the general Decathlon guide if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time for the Myth Decathlon. Thanks for watching.